Hey, I'm Jimmy Alford for Amplified Guitar Tuition, and this is Amplified's Absolute Beginners Rock and Metal Scales. Okay, so the scale we'll be learning today is the Minor Pentatonic scale. It's by far one of the most commonly used scales in rock and metal, but it's also used a lot in blues, jazz, country, and reggae. Some of the guys who use this scale almost exclusively their playing include guys like Zakk Wylde, Kirk Hammett from Metallica, Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton, even some sort of real virtuoso players like Steve Vai and Rusty Cooley, Joe Satriani. They use it too. So this scale only contains 5 notes, so that's going to make it a lot easier to learn. I'm going to stop talking now so you can start playing, but first of all let's tune up. Okay, so let's make sure your guitar's in tune. Hear the notes so you can tune up. Right, so a quick word about the picking that I'm using to play all these examples and these scales with. I'm using a technique called alternate picking. So when I play the first note on one string, I hit it with a downstroke, and the second one with an upstroke. And I do that for every string going down. And then what I tend to do is I start, when I'm descending, I start with an upstroke, followed by a downstroke, and then just repeat that all the way. So if you're not used to this, it might take a little bit of time to figure it out. Right, let's start with example number 1. You'll find the tab and scale diagrams for this example and all the other examples on the PDF document on the disc. Okay, so that was A minor pentatonic, shape number 1, or in root position. It's one of the most popular shapes, and in fact some players never actually break out of that shape, but that can lead to their playing becoming a little bit boring and a little bit stale and a bit one-dimensional. So one of the things we'll be exploring today is how to actually break out of that box, and what we'll do is we'll be learning lots of other scale positions all over the neck. So this will enable you to play a lot more freely and explore all the notes all over the guitar, because I don't want you to become one of those stale, boring, boxed-in players. We'll also be looking at ways how to get creative with this scale. We'll be doing things like sequences and of course licks. So one of the first things to address is that you can actually just move the shape around and put it into different keys. So if you take the same shape but you start on a different note, so we played in A before, we're going to shift up to B and play the same thing. So now we have B minor pentatonic. So you take it up one more fret, and you have C minor pentatonic. Take up 2 more frets and you've got D minor pentatonic. Two more frets and you've got E minor pentatonic. So as you can see, the patterns that we're using can be used in lots of different keys. But if we were just to play these scales up and down, it would sound very boring and scale-like. So one way to practice these shapes is to actually get creative with them and use something called sequences. Right, so sequences are a really helpful way to practice scales because they usually involve repeating some of the notes that you've already played, and of course this is going to help you memorise the shapes even more. In some sequences you have to play the same set of notes over and over again in whatever sequence you're using, so it's a great way to also create some killer lead runs, either ascending or descending. Right, let's take a look at sequence number 1. So in this sequence it's a repeating pattern. So what I was doing was going up 4 strings, I was jumping back a string and then going up 4 strings. So the first bit, jump back to the D string and ascend again. Now the exact same applies in reverse as well, so I'm going to descend 4 strings, jump back to the G string and then descend 4 strings again. Right, next up is sequence number 2. So rather than repeating patterns of strings, what I was doing in that example was I was repeating the same notes on each string. So on strings 5, 4, 3 and 2, I just played the pattern again twice. So the same thing applies in reverse as well. Let's look at a more challenging example that sounds really cool but will also help you get the scale shape down even more. So here it is, sequence number 3. Right, so in this example, I was going up 4 notes, jumping back 2, and then going up 4 again. So the challenge here is that in certain places you have to cross back to the string on the same fret. So for example, when you get to this bit here, you have to play the same fret on the different strings. So it might be a little bit challenging to roll your finger to get that, but persevere with it and I'm sure you'll get it. So the thing you might also want to try with these sequences is obviously taking them really slow to start with, but you might want to use a metronome or a drum loop to help you build the speed up eventually. So let's try the exact same sequence in reverse. Okay, so it's time to shift it up a gear and explore this scale all over the guitar, see how all the notes work together, and also later on we're going to get creative with some licks. The first thing we're going to do is actually change key. So the following examples are going to be in E minor instead of A minor. So we're basically going to take the first shape that we looked at and we're just going to move it on up to the 12th fret. So if you took the 5 notes from the E minor pentatonic scale and just played them on one string, on the bottom E string for example, you'd have the notes E, G, A, B, D, and E. and you can then build scale shapes from each of these starting positions. So learning how to play scales on one string is a great way to learn the notes of the scale and their locations all over the fretboard. If you apply this exercise to all the scales you were learning and played them up one string, you'd be able to memorise the notes of the guitar a lot quicker, and hopefully apply this knowledge when you're practising and soloing. So here's a little challenge for you. Have a go at memorising the E minor pentatonic scale all over the guitar by finding the notes from the scale on one string at a time. Spend a few minutes each day doing this, and it will really help you to get the scale notes down, and generally give you more freedom to play. You should aim to do this with all the scales you learn, as I said, but specifically with the E minor and A minor pentatonic scales that we've looked at. So shape number 1, which was the first one we looked at, this one here, when we're playing in E minor, taking shape number 1, you start at the 12th fret. Or you could also start from the open E string. So let's have a look at shape number 2. So pattern number 2 starts on the second note of the scale, which is G, and here it is. Pattern number 3 starts on the third note of our scale, which is A in this case. So let's take the same notes and just build the pattern up from there. Pattern number 4 starts on the fourth note of the scale, which is B. So let's take it from there. Finally, pattern number 5 starts on the fifth note, which is D. So here are some licks using some of the shapes we've looked at today. I'm also going to be using another technique called Hammerons and Pulloffs. So what you do is when you pick the first note, second note on the string, or the second note you're going up to, you hammer your finger down. And when you pull off, you do the reverse. So you pick once, fret the note with your finger, don't pick, pull off. It's the exact same thing in reverse. So you're just aiming to flick your finger slightly down towards the floor to make the note ring out. So let's have a look at some licks. Right, so this first example is in C minor pentatonic, and it's in the style of Jimmy Page. So the first three notes we're going to have are these. Got the 8th fret on the B string, followed by the 11th fret, followed by the 8th fret on the E string. So that's the pickup bar, if you like. Then we've got these two notes. So that's 10th fret on the E string, followed by the 11th fret on the B string. Next two notes are the 8th fret on the E and the B string. So I'll just play that bit for you one more time. So the next phrase starts on the 8th fret of the G string up to the 10th fret. And we're going to do that technique that I was talking about earlier on, the hammer-on. Followed by the 8th fret on the B string. And then back down, 10th fret G string, 8th fret G string. So that bit on its own sounds like this. And then the last two notes of this particular phrase are 10th fret on the G string, followed by 10th fret on the D string. So the whole thing, when you put it all together, should sound like this. In the next bit, I basically repeat some of these elements, but I'm putting in another technique, a bend, and I'm bending the string from the 11th fret up to the 13th fret, so bending from a B flat up to a C. So I'll show you that in context so you can hear what it sounds like. And then it's the same phrases that we've looked at before to finish. So I'll play that bit for you one more time. Lick number 2 is in E minor, and it's in the style of Kirk Hammett from Metallica. Okay, so for this lick in the style of Kirk Hammett, we're basically going to be using the 15th fret of the E string and the 12th fret of the E string and the 15th fret of the B string. We're going to cycle between those three notes like this. So you've got 15, pull off to 12, and then hit 15 on the B string, and then back to 12. So you're going to do that 3 times, and then it's going to be followed by this repeating pattern, 15, 12, 15, 12 on the B string. Again with pull-offs. And then we're going to get into the next half of the lick, if you like, which is going to use a technique called double stops. And that's where you play 2 notes at the same time. So we're going to start off on the 14th fret of the G string. And then we're going to pull off to our double stop, which is the 12th fret of the G string and the B string. So that together, 14, 12, 14, 12. And then hit the 12th fret on both of those strings again. Okay, so this next lick is in the style of Eric Clapton, and it's in D minor pentatonic. So for this lick in the style of Eric Clapton, we're going to use D minor pentatonic. And again, a bit like the Jimmy Page one, it's got a little pickup bar. So it's just 2 notes that happens before the main theme. So we're just going to play 10 to 13 on the B string, followed by 10 to 13 on the E string with a hammer on, So those two bits together. And then we're going to pull off to the 10th fret. And then we're going to use the 13th fret of the B string back up to the 10th fret on the E string. So altogether that sounds like this. And then you've got this little descending phrase which goes like this. So if you add that with the first bit, you've got this. Then the next part of that lick actually sounds quite similar, using slightly different notes again though. So we're going to start on the 12th fret of the G string, and we're going to go up the scale. So we're going to go from the 12th fret here up to the 10th fret of the B string, and then the 13th fret of the B string. So we've got this. So the second half of that lick has quite a similar sound to the other one, but we're going to use different notes. So we're going to start on the 12th fret of the G string, go up to the 10th fret of the B string, followed by the 13th fret of the B string as well. Then back down to 10. So the first four notes. And then we've got this phrase to end. So we've got 12th fret, 10th fret on the B string. So just basically following the scale backwards. So if I play that bit for you on its own so you can hear how it all sounds. So the whole lick, both parts together, should sound like this. So now we're going to look at a lick in the style of Zakk Wylde from the White Stripes, and this example is in B minor pentatonic. So for that example, which was kind of in the style of Zakk Wylde, we used B minor pentatonic. It has a slightly more aggressive vibe to it. Instead of using all alternate picking, for some of us actually using just down picking, and that helps to get some quite interesting harmonic sounds out of the guitar as well, like that for example. So the first part of the lick is just this phrase repeating. So pulling off from the 9th fret of the G string down to the 7th fret, and then hit the 9th fret on the D string and back up to there. So the first bit is like this. And then I'm going to repeat that 9 to 7 pattern. I'm actually going to play it 3 times this time round. And then to finish, I'm just going to climb up the scale to hit the root note again, which is B, up here. So that sounds like this. Okay, so for our final lick, we're going to go back to A minor, and we're going to do a lick in the style of Zakk Wylde. Okay, so for that lick in A minor in the style of Zakk Wylde, that was a little bit faster and a little bit more aggressive with the picking. So what it is it's basically a repeating pattern, a bit like some of the sequences we looked at before. So I'm going to start on this note, A, on the 7th fret of the D string, instead of starting all the way back here on the A on the 6th string. It's sometimes good to start in different places. So the first pattern is this, and then we're going to carry that on up the neck. So, and then start on the 7th fret of the D string, same pattern. So we very end there. So those two together. And then for our final pan, we're going to start on the 8th fret of the B string, go down to the 5th fret of the B string, down to the 7th fret on the G string, and then we're going to ascend with that note there, 5th fret of the B string, 8th fret of the B string, and then you can either finish here on the 5th fret, or you could slide up to this note here, which is also an A. It's the same note, so 10th fret of the B string or 5th fret of the E string. It's up to you. So I'll play that lick for you all the way through slowly. Okay, what we're going to do now is have a little break from the studio to go and apply some of the concepts of this scale and also look at some improvisation techniques. Hi, welcome back to the next section of this video where I'm going to be talking to you and explaining how to actually use the scale that we've learned in a little bit more detail and hopefully explore your creative side. So I'm assuming some time's gone by and you're getting used to the shape and perhaps tried out some of the licks that I've shown you. So one of the things that you'll need to be aware of is how to use the scale when you're improvising, or perhaps when you start to create your own leads and guitar solos and stuff. So one of the things you should do that I explained earlier on was you don't want to get boxed in. So even if you've just learned a couple of the shapes that I've explained, then you'll already be covering a lot more fretboard. So instead of just sort of playing up and down the scale, that kind of thing, you could try doing something like this. So what I was doing there was I started off with, in this position here, in A minor, and I just played up 4 notes. And then I went along to root position, I played the exact same notes, just an octave higher. And then I went to the next pair of strings, which just happens to be in the next shape along, and played those 4 notes as well. So altogether it sounds like this. Sounds quite simple, but it's actually quite effective. So I want to talk to you a little bit about something called phrasing. Phrasing is something that's actually really important when it comes to being creative. It's a bit like having a conversation with somebody. You don't really want your conversation or your soloing or your lead part to be based on the scale as such, because essentially a scale is just a series of notes strung together. And if I was to play it very linearly, very logically, I'm bored already. So what I'm going to try to do is take a series of notes and change the way that I say it, if you like. So let's take like an 8-note pattern or an 8-note sequence of notes. And again, a sequence of notes is just that, it's just the notes. It's not that expressive on its own. But hopefully what I'll be able to show you is like we just take some notes and just turn it into something completely different. And there's many ways to do this, but in this example I'm going to use the rhythm, so the actual way that I play the notes, and like I said, come up with something completely different. So let's take an 8-note pattern like this. So that was a phrase that was very similar to something that I showed you earlier on. It still sounds a little bit boring and scale-like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually come up with a different rhythm for these notes, and well, you'll see from the example that it's essentially the same notes. I'm playing the same number of notes, I'm still playing 8, but I'm going to change the rhythm, make it sound completely different. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it sounds a bit different. What I did differently there was I played that note twice. Let's swing the notes a little bit to change the rhythm and make a completely different sound. So that kind of rhythm. And let's just add some extra notes on the end, just for fun. Just to make the phrase a little bit more complete. So you can get inspiration for your own phrases by using different rhythms, like I just did, or you can look at other instruments. The best instrument to look for in terms of phrasing, in terms of actually speaking, is of course the human voice. So if you listen to a lot of vocal music and a lot of your favourite singers and just kind of analyse the way that they say the words and sing the words, and then you can try and replicate it on guitar, and it's really quite a cool exercise, and it will make your phrasing sound pretty unique and a bit more vocal rather than just boring robotic guitar kind of sound. So in this section I'm going to show you some specific exercises that you can use to improve your technique. One of the techniques that we looked at earlier on was Hammerons and Pulloffs. So as an example, to practice Hammerons and Pulloffs, you could play the scale on its own using Hammerons and Pulloffs, and that would look like this. So as I was ascending up the scale, playing the first note and then using the next finger to hammer on to the next note without picking. And then the same in reverse, except that you pull off, so you flick your finger down towards the floor like I explained earlier. One good exercise that you could use to help improve this technique and build up some finger independence and a little bit more strength in your fretting fingers is to just isolate the fingers and play between the two notes like this. So I'm just going to play one note on the 5th fret with my first finger, and then the next note on the next fret up with my next finger. That looks like this. And then you can do the same in reverse using pull-offs. So that's fingers 1 and 2. So let's try fingers 1 and 3. So I'm going to put finger number 1 here at the 5th fret, and I'm going to play fret number 7 with my 3rd finger. And same in reverse. Finally, fingers 1 and 4. So your pinky, your 4th finger, is the one that's really going to benefit the most from doing this type of exercise, and it's going to feel a little bit awkward at first, but stick with it, and you'll build up a lot more strength and independence in what is notoriously like your weakest finger. So let's try 5th fret with the 1st finger, 8th fret with the pinky. Here we go. And then the same in reverse. So when you're practicing an exercise like this, it's really best to take it slowly and make sure that you're getting the correct definition between notes and that they're both sounding nice and clear. There's no need to practice something like this really fast. at this stage, it's much more important that you just get the notes out correctly. One of the other more expressive techniques that we looked at was bending. Again, this can be quite hard until you developed a little bit more strength and independence in your left hand or your fretting hand fingers. One of the exercises that I found really helpful for bending, to get my strength up, but also to make sure that I was playing the correct note when I was bending, because nothing sounds worse than bending a note and it doesn't quite hit the mark. So what I used was a technique where I would play the note that I wanted to bend to, and then immediately after that I would bend to it. So I'll take this note for example. So we're going to play this E note here at the 9th fret on the G string, and then if you remember back to our A minor shape, we actually do play an E note. We'll play several E notes, but this one here, which is the same as this one. So I'm aiming to bend from this note here, D, up to E. So the first thing that I did was I play the note, and then immediately after I'm going to bend up to it. So once you've kind of got that sound in your ears, you can then try and do both notes simultaneously. So that'll look a little bit like this. So when you can hear that both notes are ringing together at the same time and they sound in tune, then that's a pretty good indicator that your bending has improved and sounds a lot more like the target note that you're going for. So just like I did in the previous example when I played the two notes together and bending them, earlier on in some of the licks I was using a technique called double stops, which is where you play two notes usually on the adjacent string but on the same fret, like this for example. So I've got fret number 5 here on the G and B string. So what I'm doing is just playing the two notes exactly the same time. So to practice this kind of thing, again you can obviously use more than one finger. I would just make sure that you're fretting the first note on the G string for example, or whichever string you choose, with the very tip of your finger. And then underneath, when you go to the other string, you're just aiming to get it with almost the pad of your finger. So that's not quite the same as playing the two notes separately. If you were to play the two notes separately, that would look like this. So what I was doing there was I was playing the 5th fret on the G string with the tip of my finger, and then using a technique that's called the rolling technique to play the note underneath on the B string at the 5th fret as well. So that was the one that I played with the pad of my finger. So you could practice this as an exercise just on its own, to make sure that you're getting the clarity and the definition between the two notes. Sounds a little bit boring like that, so let's play each note twice. And what you're really aiming to do there is to make sure that neither of the notes are ringing together. So it's quite different sound to this. You're going to come across licks that would perhaps use double stops and playing
the same fret but on different strings. Working on those two techniques in isolation will really help with playing. So stick with it, really persevere with this, experiment and have fun. If you use the section before, when I discussed the scales and the shapes and the sequences and everything like that, and you combine it with your own creative ideas and your own inspiration and influence, then that will make the scale a lot more easy and a lot more fun to master.
Let's head back to the studio and let's talk about some of the gear that I was using. Just a quick word about some of the gear that I've been using. First of all, let's start with the most important bit, the guitar. This is a ESP H351 NT. NT just means no tremolo, so no whammy bar tricks for me, I'm afraid. So it just means that the strings go straight through the body, and I find that it just holds the tuning a little bit better and creates better sustain. The other thing about this guitar is the pickups. These are active pickups, which means they're powered by a battery, and that just gives it a slightly more heavier sound, and also again creates better sustain from the guitar. So when you're doing all your crazy lead stuff, you really want that kind of thing. This isn't an advert for ESP guitars, but I do generally find them very nice to play, and they're pretty affordable as well. And I've set this up with slightly heavier strings on it. Again, it's just down to personal preference. There seems to be a little bit of a myth that if you use really light strings and have really low action, that it's going to make you like this insane shredder. Well, it's actually not the case. If your strings are raised slightly higher and you use slightly heavier strings, it can actually make you playing a lot cleaner, and that's what we're aiming to do eventually, is to make you not only a super shredder but a super clean shredder as well. So yeah, let's have a look at the amp that I was using for today. Right, so after the guitar, what I do is I run into a couple of pedals before I get to my amp. First one is very important, as you can see from the big letters on here, tune. Obviously, nothing you do is going to sound any good if you're out of tune, so always make sure you tune first. And then this little green box here that I go into is an Ibanez Tube Screamer. And now what that does is, a little bit like the pickups that I use, it just acts as a little bit more of a boost before it hits the amp. So it just gives it a slightly grittier sound. A lot of rock and metal guys actually use this pedal or something similar. Others are available before they go into their amp. And like I said, it's just to give it a little bit of a boost, a little bit more of a kick, and generally makes it sound rocking. So onto the amp itself. This is a Laney Ironheart amplifier. Comes in one colour, black. These nice red lights under it there. And then you've got all your EQ controls here. But one of the things I wanted to talk about mainly was the gain. So that's how much distortion, how much grit you get. Again, it's a common misconception that you have to put everything on a 11 to get a really good heavy sound. It's really not the case. In fact, sometimes less is more. So if you back off the gain a little bit, it just gives a little bit more clarity to the notes. And hopefully you could hear that all right on this DVD as well. So I hope you found this video fun and useful. Please remember to refer to the document that comes with this video lesson as well, for all the tab and all the explanations and stuff on there. And I'd just like to say thanks to the crew here at Broken Physics Productions, and thank you to you for watching.